Good morning and welcome to Her Corner Office. Thanks for taking time to join us as we begin the wind down of summer and fight the headwinds as we race to create great year-end results. My name is Tom Koch, and I'm a senior partner and founding member of Kingsley Gate Partners Executive Search. Prior to going into executive search, I worked in HR for many years, running HR for global companies or large divisions of companies including PepsiCo, Home Depot, GE, and others. As a former HR leader, I am particularly excited about this morning's guest. I'm joined today by Caroline Starner Dadras. Good morning, Caroline, and thank you for spending your morning with us.
Good morning, Tom.
Caroline, good to see you. Caroline and I have known each other for well over a decade. During that time, I've had the opportunity to see her in action and can say with great confidence that she is one of the brightest and influential minds in business and human resources. In fact, I had the pleasure of seeing her recognized as National Human Resources Association HR Executive of the Year. She earned that honor while she was SVP of HR, helping lead Oakley to become a great place to work and one of the most successful brands in consumer products. Caroline built her career and impact at a number of iconic brands, including J&J, Chase, PepsiCo, DuPont, and Gap. In addition, she's been an advisor to Ares Management, a leading PE firm, as well as an independent consultant and is a board member of LifeSpeak. Today, Caroline is CHRO of Unified Women's Health. Unified is the largest women's health services organization in the country. Their purpose is to provide the best healthcare in the world to women. They are backed by Altus and Ares private equity firms and are aggressively growing to support their purpose. Human capital is key to their long-term success. Again, thanks for joining, Caroline. Let's jump in. Tell us your story. What are some of the key experiences that led you to where you are today?
Great. Well, thanks, Tom, for having me. And thank you for that very humbling introduction. So my story, Tom, begins in New Jersey when I was a teenager working for my dad in his HR department. My dad had a short career as an HR executive in a bank, and he brought me to work with him during all the summers and breaks. And so when it came time to begin thinking about what I planned to do after high school, he really forced me to declare my personal interests. And at that point, I had had a couple of years working with him over summers. And I thought what he did seemed good. He was helping people and he was working in a business environment. And so that really led to the discovery of industrial and labor relations as a major and as a professional field. And so with my dad's help and support, I decided to attend the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University. And that is really a pretty key part of the story, because getting that professional expertise and becoming a part of that network of professionals over my career has really been an essential part of my growth and development. So the story continues at Cornell. Another pivotal thing happened, which is that while I was getting my education, I really thought that so another pivotal thing happened at Cornell, and that was really honing in on my field of interest. And I entered Cornell thinking I wasn't going to become an HR person. I was going to become a labor lawyer. And so all throughout my education, I was focused on that, distorted my coursework in that way. And my first semester of senior year, I did an internship in a labor law firm in Washington. And much to my chagrin, I learned that I didn't like the work of lawyering. And so this was coming pretty late in the game, because at this point, all my colleagues were really landing jobs, and I was really just starting over and beginning the interview process. So I was fortunate enough to land a role in the HR training program at Chase Manhattan Bank. And Chase was really a pivotal experience for me, not just because it was my first experience, but because there were really some key learnings that came out of that 3-year period. So first of all, I had to kind of get over myself. And by that, I mean all these years at college with this ambition to kind of work in Washington and really kind of be a part of changing legislation to the betterment of business was really my dream. And so the fact that I had declined a role with the Department of Labor to take this job with Chase Manhattan Bank, because my dad told me I had to be economically self-sufficient, made me feel like I was a bit of a sellout. And so I literally kicked stones to work, walking to Chase Manhattan Plaza every day in New York City, really, angry with myself that I had made this choice. So my idea was that I would try to get fired. And so if they fired me, then I could just default and go back to this career that I thought I really wanted to have. So for some reason, I didn't feel like I could just quit and go take that job. So I really felt like a sellout because I was doing something that I really didn't intend to do. And I felt like I was backed into a corner of this because my dad told me I need to be economically self-sufficient. So my strategy was, maybe I can get them to fire me. And the way I can do that is really just by being bold and telling them exactly what my thoughts were on how things were going and on projects that I was working on. I just really had no filter in sharing my opinions and ideas. So I remember very vividly this lunch that I was having with one of the executives and my other colleagues in the training program. And we were talking about this particular project that we as trainees were working on. And I had a disagreement with the approach and with the underlying assumptions around what was driving kind of our recommendation on this project. And so after my colleagues were sharing their points of view, I weighed in, and I weighed in a pretty opinionated and direct way. And again, I just had this sense that it was fine, and if they terminated me, that would be fine. If they don't care for my opinions, it's better that I don't work there. And instead of that happening, what happened instead is that this senior executive pulled me aside after that lunch and actually commended me. And he commended me for having a different point of view, for having the courage to share that point of view, for the logic that I used behind that. And so this was really pivotal for me because it became basically a hallmark of how I worked. It really reinforced in me the importance of being that truth teller and sharing. This really reinforced for me something that I've done throughout my career, which is really be able to speak to what others are thinking, not being afraid to kind of challenge what people might be saying or to challenge underlying assumptions. And I really do think that directness and candor became one of the strengths that's helped propel me from throughout my career.
So what a great learning so early in your career that you've been able to leverage throughout. Why don't you spend a moment telling us a few of the highlights of your career?
Sure. So it's hard to kind of pull out any one specific highlight because for me, each experience I had really had its own set of highlights. But I would say if I had to choose one, it's probably the decade that I spent working for Taco Bell and Yum Brands. It's the single longest place that I worked in my whole career. And it's also a place where I developed a network of mentors that really are responsible for carrying me forward in my career. Also, the Pepsi system, which Taco Bell sat during that period of time, really demanded that HR leaders be strategic business leaders. And so it really instilled in me at an early point in my career this idea of being a business-focused HR person. And I think that really aided me along the way as I took on successively bigger jobs in different companies and different industries.
Having spent the time at PepsiCo, 7 years at PepsiCo myself in HR, completely agree. It changed my career and the way I approached HR as a business leader. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I would say, so Taco Bell was really special for that reason. And I think that the other reason that Taco Bell and Yum Brands would be a highlight for me is because I stayed there for 10 years because the equation, the conditions for my success were really optimal. And so when you're in a place where you can exhibit your strengths and your values are aligned with that of the organizations, really great things happen. And I think it was really that combination of things for me that caused me to stay there for 10 years and caused me to have the success that ended up being the foundation. Another highlight in my career, I have to say, was my time working at Oakley. And the reason it was a highlight is because we just really had an exceptional leadership team and a culture that was just so strong in such a positive way that I could see how the combination of a unified leadership team working in a strong culture could really build the momentum of the business and really make work fun. And literally, this was probably a moment in my career where I enjoyed going to work every day. I enjoyed the people I worked with. We did a lot of traveling around the globe together. And those are some of the fondest memories in my life, not just in my professional career. And so it really challenged my professional choices after that, because I didn't think that that scenario could ever be replicated again. I just thought that it was such a unique circumstance that I have to just, suspend the idea that anything could ever be as good as that was. But what I came to learn was that I could find that same type of joy in my work, and it just came through other avenues. And so particularly consulting reignited my passion for HR. And so where I thought that, Oakley would be the end, and I had said at the point that I joined that this would be my last gig, I did learn that it wasn't my last gig and that there was kind of a life beyond that could be equally good, even though it was different.
Got it. Later, you went into consulting. Tell me a little bit about that and how it impacted your career.
Sure. So consulting was actually not an intentional plan. So I had left Oakley, and I had some time to contemplate what would be next in my professional career. And actually, this came at a moment where I was questioning whether or not I would choose HR all over again. If I was sitting at the table with my dad and he asked me again what my professional interests are, would I say it was still HR? And so I used this transition period to actually begin to reflect on what careers I thought I might like to have. And I began going down a path of pursuing those different dreamy options. Should I own a flower shop? And, would I become a real estate agent because I love homes and remodeling? And so I went down this path, exploring all these other options, thinking I had outgrown HR. And one of those mentors had actually invited me to do a project with her. And in that project, I really rediscovered my passion for HR. And I learned that when I can be engaged in the type of problem solving that I like to do with leaders who genuinely care about human capital, that I can get really excited about HR. And so this kind of serendipitous project that I did actually birthed a whole consulting business and led me into private equity, which gave me a chance to work with multiple portfolio companies of Ares management. And it was really a very exciting and energizing period of my career.
That's great. Love to hear that. All right. So clearly you've succeeded in a number of different environments. Can you share with the audience what's been your recipe for success? What have been your drivers?
Sure. So this is an interesting question because I'm not one of those people that set out early what my career ambitions were and then orchestrated my experiences to deliver that ultimate career outcome. I really had a more of an untraditional approach to it, I think. And so as I look back on it and I look at the theme that underlines the different experiences that I had and what led me from one role in one company to the next, I unconsciously followed opportunities that aligned with my technical strengths, but also worked for organizations that aligned with my personal values. And so I always say that my career was a bit more serendipitous in the fact that it wasn't very pre-planned. And I attempted to have a plan. And so at that moment, when I made this decision not to become a labor lawyer, I didn't completely give up the dream. And at that point, I had mapped out this beautiful 10-year career. And my idea was that I would work 5 years in a non-union environment, and then I would work 5 years in a union environment. And by then I would be married and I'd start having children, and that would be the perfect time to actually go back to law school. And then following that, I would go back to DC and fulfill this ideal to really work as a lobbyist on labor issues. And so basically, none of that panned out personally or professionally. And so what happened instead was that I was really drawn to organizations that had big, ambitious change agendas. And I was attracted to roles that had a lot of opportunity where I could personally create change. And that drove me to different industries, to take jobs I had never done before, to take ill-defined jobs, to take jobs I vowed I would never do again, because I was really driven by the ability to do something in a most excellent fashion for a company that would make a significant or substantial change. So my recipe, I would say, was really this idea of knowing what powered me personally, and then making sure that I was performing those sorts of jobs or roles inside organizations that also had a tight alignment with my personal value set.
Mm. I'm curious, are you familiar with Strength Finders?
I am.
What's your top rated strength?
Yeah, well, my top rated strength is a maximizer. And so this is, I learned again, kind of later in my career, how important this really was to me to be able to deliver that strength in my roles. And so how that translated was that I needed a lot of autonomy, and I needed to be able to do everything in the most excellent fashion that I could envision. And if the company was such that they just weren't really willing to kind of go all the way to the mat to deliver something, that was going to be a misalignment for me, and that was going to lead to angst and unhappiness on my part. And so this idea, right, in Strengths Finders is actually, so Strengths Finders is actually there for a reason, because when you are in roles that play to your strengths, like, really amazing things happen. And so again, without really consciously understanding that, early in my career, that is really what came to be. And I think what's led me from one success to the next.
There's at least two key points I've heard. One is play to your strengths, and the other you referenced a moment ago was do things that you're passionate about and that you enjoy. And
Yes.
so many people stay in jobs where they're not playing to one or both of those.
Yes.
So that's led to many successes throughout your career journey. What's been the greatest success, and what's been the most significant lesson you've learned?
Yeah, it's really hard to answer that question. Success for me is making a meaningful contribution to the business and enjoying it. And so every experience I had was the greatest success at that point in my career. So it's difficult to say that there's one experience or one accomplishment that overshadows the other, is more significant than the other, because they were all so significant at that moment in time. I think, the takeaway was that if I wasn't making a contribution or I wasn't enjoying the process, that's when I really had to step back and evaluate whether I was in the right place, whether I was in the right role, whether I was in the right company. And that's when I would ultimately make a change. So I think
I hear in that, live in the moment. And you lived in the moment, so each success was the greatest success at that point. I love that. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
Well, and I yes, that's exactly right. And I think it's an important point, because I encounter, throughout my career, I've encountered a lot of people who are always focused on the next job and the end job. And for me, I was never looking that far ahead. I was always immersed in figuring out the problem I needed to solve and doing that in the most excellent way that I possibly could. And from that, the next opportunity ultimately presented itself. And so I think when you're solving big organizational problems, that's what causes you to get noticed. And that's what then causes people, the organization, to kind of identify you for whatever the next big project is. So I think you're exactly right in picking up on this point, that I wasn't looking to what the next job was. I wasn't aiming for the next job. I wasn't doing something. I wasn't in a job to prepare me for the next, although it worked out that way. I was really always just very present and focused on the task at hand.
Oh, that's great. Well, let's switch gears a bit, given that a career is not all wine and roses. Have you ever been so discouraged that you wanted to quit? And connected to that, how do you encourage women not to give up?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I've been discouraged and wanted to quit, and I have. um, and I did that early in my career before it was as acceptable as it is today to change jobs. So when I was starting my career, there was this idea that you really shouldn't work for a company for less than 5 years. And in my first 5 years, I was on my third employer. And I was unhappy at that third job and had talked to a mentor, describing my disgruntlement and my, inclination to look for another job. And they gave me some very stern advice, which was appropriate for that day and age, which was, if you do that, you won't work again. Like you're just going to put a black mark on your record and no one is going to employ you. And so it forced me to have to work through the problems that I was in, which was a good thing. And I do think that early in my career, my discouragement and decisions to quit were driven more by immature reasons. I would set, traps, if you will, for my employer by when I was disgruntled, and I would say, okay, if my boss doesn't deliver my performance review by this date, then I'm going to start looking for a job. And so in some cases, I was kind of, creating the conditions, right? By setting these traps for them, I was setting the conditions that would give me permission to leave. But they were really driven a lot by, I believe, some immaturity now that I look back on it. So, now I think it really, as you get into larger jobs, it takes more time to kind of see your success. And I think that I've evolved to be able to determine, how to overcome some of those obstacles, and not feeling so much as a victim of circumstances, but really, how can I really change my experience inside an organization to have the experience that I want to have that really enables me to have longer tenure. But I would say, the point where I decide that it's time to go is where a disconnect occurs between, as I said, my ability to make a significant contribution in line with my values. And so that, as I look back on it, is the legitimate reason to say, okay, this isn't working, and I don't think I'll be able to overcome that.
Makes sense and aligns with some of the things that we've talked about already. Okay, one topic you constantly hear people struggle with is balance. How do you balance career, personal life, and passions? And do you really think there is such a thing as balance?
I do think that there's such a thing as balance. And I think it can be created for the people who want it. But over my career, I have seen people that just work almost incessantly. And I think for those people, they view work as their hobby. It really is their life's passion, and it's something they enjoy doing more than anything else. And that's perfectly fine for those people. That doesn't have to be the standard for everyone, however. So I think it's about understanding what is the right balance for you as an individual. For me, I have never been a person who has stayed in the office until all hours of the night or sacrificed weekends. I've just never felt like that's been demanded of me, or that has been necessary in order to meet my objectives and accomplish my goals. But what I have learned over the year, particularly as responsibilities grew, is that you do have to put a priority on balance if you want it. Work is endless. And I think particularly in this post-pandemic era, work has filled every corner of our time. Where we used to commute, or where we used to walk down the hall and have a chit chat with a colleague, it's now filling all the extra space. So if you let work dictate your schedule, you will literally be working nonstop, right? Because the work never really ends. So what I find is effective is you have to put your own standards on it. And those standards obviously have to fit whatever your responsibilities or objectives are. But for me, if I don't have balance and I become one-dimensional, that is a really big trigger of dissatisfaction. So I can give you an example of a person who worked for me. And this very interesting interaction that we had that I think by sharing the story might help some of the listeners. And so in this particular case, this person worked directly for me. She was a direct report to me. And it was budget season, and we were working feverishly to finish the budget. And the finance team had given us an additional follow-up activity that we needed to do. And I needed this direct report to go do that work, right? It was in her functional area and I needed her to do that work. So I called her, I explained the assignment, asked her if she could do that. She said yes. And the next day she delivered the product. And she delivered the product in person. And after she delivered it, she explained to me that she did it, but that she missed dinner with her grandmother. And that this was a standing weekly dinner that she had with her grandmother. And it was really upsetting to her that she had to cancel that dinner in order to complete this assignment. And she wanted me to know that. And I, of course, felt horrible because I absolutely would not have wanted her to have canceled that dinner, something that's so important to her. And I explained to her that she has to help create her own boundaries. And that if we were to kind of replay that example, what I coached her on was, if you have that commitment, you should just explain to me that you have a personal commitment and ask me what the deadline is. Because the deadline wouldn't have required her to have to cancel that dinner with her grandmother. The deadline could have been extended by a day. And so if she had merely explained to me, hey, I have this dinner, when do you need this by? We could have negotiated a time that would have enabled her to keep the dinner and make the assignment. And so that to me personifies how I've managed balance in my life, which is that I'm negotiating deadlines and I'm negotiating timelines proactively with my boss or with my colleagues so that I can maintain the balance that I need. Now, it doesn't work out like that in every single circumstance. And yes, there's times when you do have to put in extra hours in the evening or you do have to work on the weekend. But for the most part, that process has really been effective for me.
It boils down to we're each accountable for our own balance. And we have to have the willingness to go out on a limb and manage that, which can be uncomfortable at times.
Yes.
All right. And speaking of uncomfortable, being in a leadership role can be very stressful, especially in change, transformation, and growth environments like you've been in. How do you like to unwind?
Yeah, well, as I said, the balance is very important to me. And I do have other things, other dimensions of my life, as I like to say, that it's important to me to spend time on. And so the things I like to do are exercise. And this is one that I learned, I would say midway along my career. I was really struggling to fit in the exercise. And I saw, the head of the function that I was working in, getting her exercises. And I'm like, hey, tell me, how do you do this? Like, how do you manage your schedule with, all these things you want to do personally? And she's like, oh, I put it on the calendar. And so exercise is one of those things that is on my calendar. There is a block for the days and times that I want to exercise. I treat it like an immovable meeting. And oftentimes I'm asked if I can use that, if that time can be used for another meeting. And I say no. And again, like 95% of the time, it doesn't become a problem. There are, a few moments where that's just the impossibility. I'm the last person for as the reason why that meeting can't occur. And so I will make that change. I am flexible on that. But exercise is really important to me. Doing something creative really fuels me, and it also kind of relaxes my mind. And so I like to do things like gardening, cooking, crafts. During COVID, I took up mending, sewing. And so making sure that I'm doing something creative every day is an important way for me to kind of unwind and let my mind take a break from the stresses of the job. And recently, I've been introduced to meditation. And I know that many people might think that it's a little bit hokey pokey, and I had that perception of it too. But I read a book written by Emily Fletcher called Stress Less, Accomplish More. And she has a 15-minute meditation technique for what she calls busy people. And I have really found that this has become a necessary part of my daily routine. And it really is just giving my brain a nap, which is having a refreshing effect and just helping me gain perspective and, unwind from the stresses of work.
Sounds like a good read and a great practice. All right, let's talk for a minute about how you leverage the wisdom of others. Do you have a role model or mentor that's helped you throughout your career?
Yeah, so I would probably say mentors are the key to my success. And there isn't one role model or one mentor that I've had from the beginning of my career throughout, but rather there are many, many people who I've encountered over the years who have been on the other end of a phone a friend that have really helped me through challenging, difficult, or new situations. And so I would say that the mentoring that I've received has not been in the traditional formal or structured way. So early in my career, I had the opportunity to be exposed to many executive leaders. And I used that as a way to kind of study their styles and what was impactful and what I liked about the way in which they operated. And so I really just adopted what I liked best from a whole bunch of people and continued to study that over time. You can always learn something from everyone that you come into contact with. And so I'm continuing to pull down from different people that I see interact, things that I like. Another thing was that as I had the privilege of interacting with some of these executives, I made sure that I continued that network both at the time that we worked together and beyond. And so while we worked together, I would initiate meetings to have a lunch or to find a reason to talk to them about a topic to get to know them better and create a relationship. And then when we were no longer working together, I would continue to reach out to them if I thought that they could be helpful to me. And so the interesting thing about this is it's not like there's somebody that I met with every week ongoing. Sometimes 5, 7, 10 years would pass between some of these interactions. And I would still just pick up the phone and reach out to them. And it would be a great chance to reconnect since we hadn't in a long time, but then also hearing what they're up to and still gaining whatever advice I thought I might be needed. And likewise, they would call me over the years. And so it became kind of a reciprocal relationship.
No, that's great. And a key part of that is you taking the initiative. So with all those things in mind, how important do you think it is to have a mentor to grow as a leader? You said it was the key for you. And what steps would you recommend our listeners take to build that type of relationship?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's essential that you have mentors. I think it's virtually impossible to have all the knowledge or perspective that you need in every moment or when you're taking on a new assignment. And so having another person to talk to validate your thinking with, to gain wisdom from, to borrow a template from, I think is really critical to helping learn and grow. So while over my career, I've leveraged many different people to help me, and I'm in deep gratitude for all of them for taking my calls, particularly in urgent situations, and sharing so liberally what their experiences were and what I needed to know at the point in time that I needed it. But there is one person who just kept recurring in my career, who I would say is really responsible for the most pivotal career moves that I've had. And so she really, hired me out of a specialist role for the first time. She was the first person to give me my first bona fide VP role. She was a door opener for me on starting my own business and giving me the first gig that ultimately introduced me to private equity. And so this is a great example where we didn't necessarily talk often, but at the times we did, they were really very impactful. And anytime that I did need to call on her for advice, she was there, and ultimately was anytime I did need to call her for advice, she was always there. And literally every time we connected, something positive for me would happen. So I would say the steps that I would recommend for listeners is first, suspend your belief in the fact that there's kind of a unicorn lifelong mentor. I think that people can get really stuck on, I need to pick the person, and then that person needs to commit to regular and frequent meetings with me. And I don't really think that's necessary. While some people can perhaps have that in their life, I don't think that's a condition for having great mentorship. I would say activate instead on your broad network. So as we say, when people leave a company, that our networks just get bigger. And so continuing to expand your network and stay activated on that, not being afraid to keep in touch with former bosses, especially those who go on to bigger and bigger jobs, can always be a source of information and counsel for you. And checking in periodically, even if you don't have something particularly you need help with, but really just keeping that connection with a quick note, but also not being intimidated to call them because you do need help. And don't let the fact that you haven't talked to somebody in 5 or 10 years prevent you from reaching out. That can really reignite that relationship and, again, really serve you well. And in my experience, those people, even though there may have been long stretches of time in between when we've had a chat, we're always both really happy for the reunion, and it's always proved really fruitful for me.
That's great. Continuing on the theme of learning and growth, what are some strategies that you can share with our listeners to help them grow within their organizations?
Yeah, well, I would say one is taking on roles with responsibilities that you've never had before. And I think a necessary part of growth is doing new things. And if you look at, if your ambition is to kind of grow in the hierarchy or to expand, by definition, it means you're going to have to do things eventually that you haven't done before. So really being comfortable with that. And then choosing those roles by looking for, So taking on responsibilities you haven't had before, I think is really essential to growth. Now, within that, I would say, look for roles that solve company problems. How can you bring your strengths to helping a company solve one of its biggest problems? That automatically is going to put you in a position to do well because you're going to do something that plays to your strengths. But also when you're solving company problems, that tends to get you noticed. And pursue your passion projects. So if there's something you just feel really passionately about, volunteering or initiating yourself to get involved in those passion projects in the organization, again, is going to increase the likelihood of success. And then accept unexpected assignments as a challenge. And so I know as an HR person, sometimes we, as an organization, invite people to do things that just wasn't really in their career journey. It just wasn't in their mind as what they wanted to do or what they thought was next to do. But sometimes those most unexpected assignments can be a great challenge, can bring about new strengths, can deploy your existing strengths in new ways, and that can really lead to future opening of doors for you. The second thing I would say is leverage your network and be resourceful to find approaches. So when you're taking on those new responsibilities, there's going to be things you don't know, but lean on your network to help you learn what you don't know and to get over those humps. And then lend your strengths and expertise to projects that are driving the most value in your company. So really, spend some time understanding where is the value being created in your organization and how can you lend your strengths there. And then, of course, there's the standard things like stating your career goals and asking for feedback and coaching. And so oftentimes I think bosses don't know what people's ambitions are. And I think stating those goals and really soliciting feedback around how you can achieve those goals with your current employer can really help go a long way to realizing them for you.
Great advice. So we'll wrap up. We like to ask our guests to share one prediction for their industry. I think this is particularly important considering the time that we're living in and the uncertainties that businesses face. So can you share your top prediction for 2022 or 2023?
Yeah, so that's a big question. What I feel like I can say with good confidence is, currently working in the women's health space, the need for investment in women and family health has never been more urgent. The pandemic has really forced many women out of the workforce due to family and health obligations, and that trend is continuing and adversely affecting communities of color. So women's health is becoming one of the biggest categories in digital health for venture capital. And so rather than making my own prediction, what I can tell you is that Forbes has indicated that, so I'm not sure that I'm really qualified to make a prediction in this space, but I know that Forbes has made a prediction that the women's health market will grow from $1 billion that it was in 2021 to $60 billion by 2027. And they predict that that growth will come through transformative solutions that will advance health equity and also improve individual family finances. So the vision for unified women's healthcare is to provide the best healthcare in the world to women. And that's a vision that I am deeply personally connected to, but one that's also professionally very exciting to be a part of.
Well, that's a great point to finish on. I don't think anybody would do anything but agree with that and support it. So with that, we'll wrap for today. Caroline, I really enjoyed spending time with you and hearing your story and backstory, and look forward to more success in the future. Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great finish to the week.